So bigger picture, what is this album to you? What is it in your world, and what do you want it to be in other people's world?
So I got the idea for Graceful Rage about midway through the lockdown, but right before like the pandemic hit and everything. I was going through a really rough spot mentally and emotionally, and I hadn't quite dealt with certain things and certain situations that had like happened, a few years prior. And then on top of that, there was like other stuff going on. So like there was all this like trauma and stressful shit that was just like piling up and up and up and up. And I was just so busy with like band stuff and school. And I also had like a job at the time, like work, and just all of that together. I just wasn't really able to think about anything or like really unpack anything. Like I didn't have the time or the energy to really like self reflect at all. So I was just kind of, drifting through life in a very like low energy way. And then the pandemic hit, and I was just like, oh fuck, because I already was feeling like really really isolated and like really alone because I felt like there was no one I could really talk to about the stuff that I was going through. I was kind of freaking out, but also at the same time, being a student and like having stopped working right before that, I had a lot of time on my hands, which was, not the best, but also kind of a blessing for me personally, because for the first time, I was able to just like hit pause, reflect on the last few years, and just kind of, sit with it for once, because the way I was processing my emotions up until then, I was just going, either that and just like suppressing everything, or I would just sit in it like a dirty, nasty swamp and just feel sorry for myself and deflect blame onto everyone else and just totally not take responsibility for the things that were going on in my own head. But I guess because of the sort of pause on life that the pandemic caused, I was able to sort of sit with what I was feeling in a way where I wasn't just feeling sorry for myself constantly. And I started writing a few songs, not with any intention to release them, but just as therapy, just to like get the shit out of my system. And then a few months later, I was thinking about it, and I was just like noticing how, reading a lot of articles about how like the pandemic is affecting people emotionally, mentally, but especially like young people, like how isolated everyone was feeling, but because of, the social media expectation to like pretend that you're fine all the time, it kind of seems like everyone was feeling the same shitty ways, but also everyone kind of assumed that they were the only ones feeling that way, or at the very least that's what I had felt for a very long time, because when you're going through those really dark periods, your brain has ways of tricking you into thinking that you're the only person experiencing these things, and then with social media on top of that, that just further like drills that thought in. So about halfway through the pandemic, I was like, okay, wait, is there any chance that me releasing these songs and being honest about where I'm at, is there any way this could help people somehow? So I got on a call with my label after like previously, like just a few months before, I like had a call with them, and I was just like, yeah, we're just gonna like lay low, like with the pandemic and everything. Like, we're not gonna like do anything. Like I'm just gonna like take time for myself. And then of course, like months later, I'm like, Sean, I need to put out a record. Not
Yeah.
like not exactly as demanding, but I was definitely like very energetic in that Zoom call and being like, all right, y'all, like if this sounds totally bonkers and you don't want to go for it, like I totally understand, but I have some songs and I think it'd be really cool to put out a record in the middle of a pandemic, surprise dropping a record, being a really tiny band. And I was expecting them to be like, I mean, Skeletal Lightning is an amazing label, and I wasn't expecting them to be like, no, you're fucking stupid. But of course, I was expecting there to be like, well, like, let's think about this. Like, let's come back to this idea. But when I brought it to them, they were like, let's do it. Let's just fucking do it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like, oh shit, okay, cool. And we got in touch with Barty Strange because he had been reaching out to people about like producing and engineering records, and we connected with him, and the vibes were immaculate, and it just kind of all fell together in such a short amount of time. It was very like serendipitous in a way, but yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you decided to just go for it. It feels like waiting for the end of the pandemic is like a fool's errand for everybody, because we don't know how this will continue, and you know what is probably most needed right now are records like yours, things that are coming from a place of honesty and of feeling that can help people, like you said, not feel so alone, even as we're over a year now into this and like unsure of when it'll truly be behind us.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that I had to get through my head was, okay, I can't just wait for the perfect moment, because there is no such thing as the perfect moment. Like I just have to adapt to this, and it is what it is.
So we decided to go with a natal chart for the album. Some astrologers might have chosen to look at this as an event or a moment, the release of the album, but because this felt so close to you and so emotional and a part of you and connected to you, it seemed like it made more sense to give this album a natal chart of its own, as if it were a living, breathing thing that's connected to you in that way. So without further ado, here's the natal chart. There are a lot of interesting things about this as pertains to its release and to how it relates to your natal chart. The first thing I want to point to is the rising sign. It's a Sagittarius rising chart, which first of all connects to your natal moon, which is Sagittarius. So it tells us right away, you know, the rising sign, the ascendant in a chart, is kind of the first impression that the outside world may have of you. And moreover, Sagittarius, it's a fire sign, it's energetic, and directly opposed to the ascendant, so meaning an opposition aspect. So 180 degrees away from the ascendant is the planet Mars. Mars is all about action and urgency, and it's in the sign of Gemini in this chart. And Gemini is known as kind of the most youthful, unpredictable sign of the zodiac. And so when we combine Mars of action and energy and assertion with this very like moving, you know, not childish, but childlike sign, we get the idea of a surprise drop. It's something unpredictable, something that just comes for you. So we're tying that in through this line, this red opposition line to the ascendant. It's showing right away people are going to perceive this as something immediate and something exciting, something that's moving around. Sagittarius is all about kind of meaning and truth and honesty. Like you just said, you wanted to release something honest, that's what you felt would help people, is honesty of your experience. So we're getting that, the moon, your experience, Sagittarius, honesty, and through this kind of surprise energy that's just being dropped onto the world through this opposition. So then we can look at the sun sign. So this album is coming out a few days after your birthday. So of course it's going to be a Pisces sun, just like you are. So we've got this other direct connection to you. This album is a part of you. It shares two signs in the big three here, and the moon of the chart is in Pisces as well. So all three of these signs in the big three of the album chart are very, very identifiable for you. Something that it's like they've come from you. All 12 of the zodiac signs are ruled by a planet that is assigned to them. And what Pisces and Sagittarius have in common is that Jupiter rules them both. So this one planet has a lot to say about the big three of the chart. And when we come look at Jupiter, which is right here in the third house of your chart, Jupiter is in the sign of Aquarius. And Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. So we're kind of following this lineage a little bit to get to this overall point I'm going to make here, which is that Saturn and Jupiter are informing your big three. So where your sun, moon, and rising in this chart are getting their core from comes from the messages of Saturn and Jupiter in this chart. And what's interesting about Saturn and Jupiter is they kind of foil each other. So Jupiter is a planet of, much like Sagittarius and Pisces, it's very intuitive, it's full of life, it wants to express, it wants to share things with people, it's full of compassion. And Saturn, on the other hand, is where we can see kind of boundaries and restrictions in our lives, fears, but also in working through those fears, we find our sense of responsibility and our ability to persevere through Saturn. So these two themes are coming together, this kind of, you said that this album was important for you to be sharing. You wanted to help people by releasing this album. Jupiter is all about giving. It's about giving back and sharing what you have. The sign of Aquarius has to do with community and the collective. For Jupiter ruling this chart, it's the chart ruler. That core message is to give. It's to share your message with your community. So that Jupiter is really just there. It's this album, you could say, is it's an offering. It really is an offering from you to the people around you that are willing to accept this offering. And when it comes to Saturn, now we're going to keep following that trail from the big three to Jupiter back to Saturn. Saturn right here is in your second house, or in the second house, which has to do with self-worth, with value as pertains to the self. So it shows that this message, this offering you have, comes from work you've done with Saturn, with fears, with addressing themes of the second house. Second house in this chart for the album has Pluto in it, which has to do with trauma and with power, and where those things can come together for better or for worse. Speaking of the album titled Graceful Rage as well, we see that kind of like symbolized so perfectly in this chart. We find definitely an incredible amount of grace here. And especially in this key point of any chart between the third and fourth houses. This point is called the IC, or the Imam Koli, and it shows kind of roots, where something comes from, the heritage of something, memory, the past. But in the sign of Pisces, we're doing this in a way that's artful and sensitive and emotional. I think grace would very easily tie into these themes. And then when we see this idea of rage, is that the only fire sign in the whole chart here is the rising sign. We're channeling all of the fiery energy into getting this album out there and giving it this like explosive sense of being. And it's opposite Mars being the planet of assertion and of action. You know, if we had to pick any planet here to be assigned the word rage, it would be Mars for sure. So we get this, you know, this is it's a rage that you're giving out to the world through, you know, your graceful interpretations of that rage, through this beautiful art, through the songs that you've made.
Seems like we picked a good day to put it out.
Truly, yeah. A good day, a good time to give birth to this. And so also, while we're talking about Mars opposite the ascendant, there's a song in this album, the song in your album, God's Gift to Women, is this incredibly, like, it's very visceral, but it's also deeply funny but it's cutting and real and relatable. There's a line in there about this other person, I'm guessing that is a male, embodying like infinite jest, which is just, oh my God, it's incredible. I really got a kick out of that line. And it's so Mars and Gemini. So Gemini is a very intellectual sign. You know, reading something like Infinite Jest would be a very Gemini thing to do, especially with a man in terms of the Gemini archetype, very kind of like rational, logical, intellectualizing things. And Mars being not only embodying, you know, like perhaps the male ego in this setting of the song, but also your response to that, you know, this like, you're willing to attack it, you're willing to look at it and just take it down. And you also embody the Gemini in that Gemini it's one of the two signs of the comedian. Gemini and Sagittarius, they're kind of the two intellectual, but also deeply funny signs. And so we're bringing this kind of like this playful attack on the ego into the rising sign of the chart as well. It's not just this Pisces, this emotional Pisces heart. It's also this witty, visceral attack. So I'm wondering for you what the past has to do with this album. Not specifically, but just conceptually.
I mean, yeah, it essentially is a record both about the past and about leaving it behind, essentially. Like the two tracks that bookend the record, the opening track, Good Luck Road, and the closing track, I Can't, are both essentially about looking back at the past and saying, okay, this happened, it sucked, it's done, I'm moving away from it. So yeah, honestly, like, I could not have made this record without having experienced the things that I did, whether they were, pleasant experiences or not so pleasant experiences. I feel like I've reached a point where I'm grateful for it all, honestly. And I wouldn't have become the person that I am now without having experienced those things, for sure. How funny would it be if you're like, okay, so this is crazy, but I got nothing. Like, I can't connect any of this to this fucking record. You picked the wrong day.
Oh no. Well, I'm glad that you guys picked this day. A lot of people will come to astrologers to have an astrologer help them pick an auspicious day for an event. I mean, like, literally
Wow.
presidents of the United States have done that.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it was Reagan who had him and his wife had an astrologer for like a couple of astrologers over spanning multiple decades, and they used an astrologer to pick the date of his inauguration or the moment of his inauguration. Like,
God, I think Ronald Reagan is the last president I would have pegged as an astrology bitch. That is,
no, right?
I can't. That's too much. I can't even begin to unpack that.
I think part of it had to do with like there was an assassination attempt on him, right? And I think it like scared the shit out of his wife or something like that. So she was like, she leaned into astrology to kind of like feel okay with the fact that they were going to be in these very like, I mean, being the president of the United States must be pretty scary. You must like wake up every day and wonder if someone's going to try to kill you that day. So they were like leaning into astrology, and it comforted her. And I think he just got really on board with it. That's how the story goes anyway, but they may have both just been really into astrology. I feel like the very first track of the album, Good Luck Road, immediately like lets the listener know, like, you're going to be listening to an album that is about trauma. It's about, the very human untangling of what traumatic events mean to somebody. And so that I'm bringing in that Pluto here. The first song, Good Luck Road, feels very Plutonian. It's just like you're immediately letting the listener know, like, this is some real shit we're about to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Because like the really interesting thing about trauma is like, yes, it can be like world-ending, abhorrent, unforgivable shit, but it can also, be something that most people go through, that, people can definitely move past, but is still extraordinarily like world-shattering when it happens. Like everybody has trauma, and trauma can be anything, and anything can be everything to you, and I just feel like that's a really important thing to remember. And especially with the opening track, like, yeah, I pretty much set the stage for like, yeah, this is gonna be a little bit of a messy record. We're gonna get a little messy here, and it is what it is. And if you're down, stick around.
Yeah. And, I think people will stick around. I think that's, it's meaningful when you lead with something strong like that. It makes you want to keep listening. It makes you want to hear what's going to come next. And I think also too, this idea of experiencing self-worth and through unpacking, we also hear this in like the very last lyric of the album, where you say, I can't forgive you, is, it's powerful. It's in that song, you go through a process. It seems like of trying to find that forgiveness. And through doing that, you come to a place where you're like, I can't. And it feels like a conscious decision. It's not a spiteful one of, I can't forgive you. It's a decision.
Yeah.
You have chosen to not give forgiveness to somebody. And that feels very self-realized. It can be scary to not give forgiveness. Sometimes it's the easy thing, but sometimes it's the hardest thing you can do.
Yeah, for sure. Like, forgiveness can be, a beautiful way to get closure, but it can be just as affirming to choose not to forgive someone. And I believe that, you know, I mean, I guess more speaking from my own point of view is like, you don't need to forgive to necessarily move on with your life. Like, you don't need to give that, because at the end of the day, like, your growth is not about this other person or about this thing that happened. It's about you, and you're calling the shots, and, you know, you decide when it's time to move on. This is going to be kind of wild. I don't know. That sounds kind of conceited. I'm sorry, but I don't know.
No.
It feels like everything is happening as it should be. Like, it all just feels kind of like it's fallen into place, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
I'm really scared, but also really stoked. Thank you.
Letting anybody see our Chiron, our personal wounds, it's so vulnerable. It's so scary. And you've chosen to do it in a way, you know, I sat down and I read all of these lyrics and I listened to all of the songs, and I can feel the way that you're giving something to people. You're giving something that's real. You're giving a piece of yourself. So yeah, that is scary, but it's good. And not many people, you know, either have the opportunity or the willpower to do that. So congratulations.
Thank you. That means a lot. This is definitely like the most attached I've ever been to a record, and definitely the most frightened I have ever been to put out a record. But I keep coming back to this quote. I believe Fiona Apple said it, or, well, I'm about to butcher it. It's not going to be like a verbatim quote either way. But she said something once about how, like, putting out art should scare you, essentially. And like, the most meaningful art is the art that you are afraid to share with the world. And I don't know, I keep coming back to that. So yeah, it's scary, but I'm excited for it to be out into the world.
Definitely. And, you know, in preparing for these readings, I, you know, made sure to go back through the entire Harmony Woods discography and listen to them like in order before I got to the new one. And like, you can hear the seeds of Graceful Rage in your past work. Like, you can feel these memories and these feelings, your sense of emotionality, like it's there kind of swirling in each album. And this really feels kind of like a new bloom on the plant of Harmony Woods, I guess. And yeah, that sounds like an inspirational calendar, but I don't mean it like that.
It's awesome. I love it. Thank you.